fullest potential with dignity and purpose, and is nothing short of inspirational. At the heart of Rainbow Acres lies its mission, a mission that has guided us for 5 decades and will continue to light our way in the coming years. Rainbow Acres, a Christian community with heart, empowers persons with disabilities to live to their fullest potential with dignity and purpose. Marilyn Showers is not only the co-founder, but a living testament to the principles and values that Rainbow Acres was built upon. Her passion, compassion, and tireless efforts have shaped this incredible organization. Today, as we embark on the next 50 years, we must never lose sight of the fact that everything we do is for the ranchers, the heart and soul of Rainbow Acres. Marilyn is not just the key figure in the history of Rainbow Acres. She is a symbol of hope, love, and unyielding spirit that defines our community. We are excited to hear her words of wisdom and inspiration as we continue to build upon the strong foundation that Marilyn and Ralph established for Rainbow Acres. Thank you, Marilyn, for your unwavering dedication, and thank you for being part of this incredible journey. Together, we will ensure that Rainbow Acres remains a beacon of empowerment, dignity, and purpose for all its ranchers in the years to come. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Marilyn Showers.
Wow, I've never been introduced like that before. I wonder who that person really is. So, hello everybody. Yes, I'm Marilyn Showers, and I'm Ralph Showers' wife. I'm also mom to Mark, Scott, and Michael. I have 3 daughters-in-law, 9 grandchildren, and 8 great-grandchildren, most of whom live in the Verde Valley. I like to think of myself as Ralph's sidekick. He was the mover and the shaker, the one with the dreams of the future. And so when he said that he felt like it was time to chase this dream of a ranch for those that didn't have to have a place to belong, I said, let's go. As I spent time leading up to today reflecting on those crazy days, I was reminded of a passage from the Bible in 1 Corinthians chapter 3, where Paul talks about how he planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the increase. Ralph and I certainly did a lot of planting, and others have come along to water in the years since, but it is God who has always given the increase for this ministry. I'd like to share a bit with you today about how Ralph and I came to be here in Camp Verde, Arizona, planting the seeds that would grow to become Rainbow Acres. There were certainly many obstacles in the way, and I know my faith was tested as lives were turned upside down, but God always provided a way. I was born and raised in Pennsylvania. My dad was a minister, so I pretty much grew up in the church. I always enjoyed church life, from Sunday school to Bible school, summer camps, all those things. Then my family moved to Arizona my freshman year of high school. My dad had accepted a call to the First Baptist Church of Scottsdale. It was in my junior year of college, when I was home for Christmas break, that I met and fell in love with Ralph Showers. Ralph had come to work at my dad's church as what we call Minister of Christian Education. Today we might call the youth pastor. Even then, Ralph had a dream to help those who didn't have somewhere to belong. I came to understand that this dream came from his childhood of being regarded as an outsider himself as he struggled with learning disabilities. Well, apparently, Ralph also fell in love with me. He asked me to marry him, and then I got cold feet. You know, this marriage business is a big decision, and I had to be willing in my own heart to carry through for the rest of my life, no matter what. Of course, those who knew Ralph knew he was never one to say take no for an answer. And sure enough, on July 1st, 1960, we were married. We moved a lot in those early years. Life is full of milestones that you may not notice at the moment, but looking back, you can see where the important ones were. And I'd like to share a few from those early years. We left Scottsdale and moved to California. Seminary for Ralph and a teaching job for me. After seminary and the birth of our first child, Mark, we headed for Santa Clara, California. Ralph had been called to serve at the Baptist Church as minister of Christian education. Scott was born there, and this was where we learned about losing one's job without even realizing it was happening. We also learned, though, that the Lord can take what seemed like a disaster and turn it into good. We returned to Phoenix from California, and there we learned that if you spend 3 years at the Christian Center, the Lord will send you to Hawaii. A much more fun lesson on the face of it. But Hawaii ended up having its own difficult lesson to teach us. Beauty is only skin deep, and paradise ends up being just like anywhere else when you live there. We loved living in Hawaii, but it was also where Ralph and I fought the first real battle for our marriage, and where I began my off and on struggle with depression that would follow me throughout the next several years. Ralph was incredibly excited about his job, his first pastorate. He loved every moment of it, but for me, it began to feel like he wasn't home even when he was home. His job was becoming his life. And as we brought our third son, Michael, into the world, I was beginning to feel left out. I learned here that even when your partner loves you, it doesn't make them a mind reader. Fortunately for me, I found out that I indeed had a spouse who loved me and took me seriously. He immediately set time aside out of his schedule. We both did some background work, and then we went off by ourselves for a few days to get this marriage back on track. From Hawaii, we moved to Buena Park for another pastoral position for Ralph. And it was during our short stay in Buena Park that we finally began to realize that Ralph was not made to fit into someone else's box. And you could argue that I probably wasn't either. And that it was time to start chasing the dream of our own ministry. The dream Ralph had been carrying around for nearly 17 years. That dream of a ministry to those who needed somewhere to belong. In the beginning, the dream was not specifically about the mentally handicapped, but it grew into that. During our time at the Christian Center, Ralph and I had become acquainted with a family whose son was mentally handicapped. Ralph always loved talking about his dream, and it was this family that first planted the idea in his mind that maybe the ones who needed his help the most were those like their son who felt there was no place for them to belong outside of their family because of their mental disabilities. With the decision to chase the dream came yet another move, this time back to Arizona, to Camp Verde, to begin the adventure of building the ranch. From the time we decided to move to Camp Verde, our lives changed, even before we actually made the move. First of all, Larry and Joy, our good friends from Hawaii and neighbors in Buena Park, decided to come with us. We spent many hours talking about and planning what might be happening in the next few months. However, most everyone else was apprehensive about this move, including family, especially when they knew we were going to the high desert in the middle of Arizona to a piece of property that didn't even have a tree, let alone any utilities on it. We had always believed in God's guidance before, but somehow this time it was different. This was not just a new job we were going to that was for sure going to supply our income. This was truly an adventure in faith. We waited on the Lord for the right property, how to secure the property, where to find jobs. Each decision was put in his hands and was answered by him. I remember one particular incident about purchasing the property even before we left Buena Park. Ralph had said, he had 3 days of this particular week that he could spend in Arizona. Other than that, he was tied up with commitments at church. And why did that real estate agent call? He couldn't just sit around waiting for this. Well, we were sitting across the room from each other with the ironing board between us. I looked over the top of the ironing board and said, "Who's making this decision?" And he started to laugh. He said, "There I go again, getting impatient. I guess the Lord knows when the best time is for me to go." He had hardly finished saying that when the phone rang, and it was the real estate agent in Arizona giving us the go-ahead for Ralph to come. One after another, things happened like this, and we moved to Camp Verde, full of expectancy, not in the least aware of what would happen come October. I was finishing up a day of teaching Head Start. I wasn't too thrilled with my job. Teaching had never been one of my favorite occupations. Ralph came by to tell me he was going to get the barn from the old Wingfield dairy, and I said, "Why don't you take Michael with you?" Michael was about 4.5 at this time, and he had spent all morning at school. And now he would have to wait for me to finish my work before we could go home. So off they went. Later, after Mark and Scott got home from school, the 3 of us went into town for groceries for supper. And on the way into town, we stopped by the dairy to see how things were progressing. We got there in time to see them start on their journey. Ralph was perched on the roof of that building, giving a prayer for a safe journey. Michael was in the cab of the truck with Mr. McDonald. The boys and I went home the other way because I knew I wouldn't be able to pass that truck on those narrow Camp Verde roads, and I didn't want to be stuck behind it. I would have dinner ready when Ralph got home. Well, Ralph was late. Dinner was waiting. What had happened? Finally, someone came knocking on the door. It was Ray from the dairy, the man who had sold the building to Ralph. There had been an accident. He said Ralph was pretty badly hurt. They were taking him to the hospital. Ray and his wife would come by later to keep the boys so I could go to the hospital and see Ralph. What time would I like them to come? Ralph had backed into 7,200 volts of electricity while riding on top of that barn. He was moving the telephone wires that were low along the top of the roof, and at one point there was also a low electric wire, which he had ducked under. Then, as he backed up with the telephone wire, he backed into the electric wire. The burn went in his back and came out his hands. 2 thumbs and a forefinger were amputated immediately at the hospital, and 2 days later he was moved to the burn unit at the Memorial Hospital in Phoenix. They called me to tell me I should come as soon as possible. Decisions would have to be made. And within the week, Ralph's arms were amputated from just below the elbow on both arms. My life was about to fall apart. Or was it? How would the boys and I and Ralph react to this next testing in our lives? Perhaps we would see the reasons for many of the experiences we had had along the way. How would our boys deal with a tragedy like this? What would our response be this time? Didn't God send us here? Or did we misunderstand him? What was going to happen to Ralph's dream? This was beyond any of the testing and lessons we'd come up against so far in our lives, and we were full of unknowns. We knew God could take a tragedy and turn it into a miracle. We also knew that we could become bitter and blame him for this, or we could trust him with the miracle. What was going to happen next? Well, this is what happened. First of all, my depression that I'd been bothered with for several years vanished. I had become a vitally important member of the team now, and I knew I was needed. To this day, I can remember the conversation I had with the chaplain at the burn center. He told me many marriages dissolve when a spouse becomes handicapped. Everything had happened so fast, I'd not even thought about the far-reaching effects of this crisis we were in. I'd not even thought beyond today, this hour, this minute. But now I was thinking. I thought all the way back to 1960 and how I told myself that if I was going to commit to this marriage, I was in it for the long haul, no matter what. Ralph and I had made our commitment. There was not even the thought of leaving him. This was just one more challenge. I also thought back to Hawaii and realized that just like then, I couldn't expect others to know what I needed. I would have to be willing to ask for the support necessary to get through this. And I thought back to our leaving Buena Park, how we both felt strongly the call of God to build this ministry. This was where God wanted us. He would bring us through. I think our boys learned that they could face a tragedy and come out on top. Our family became a closer unit as we shared in Ralph's experiences, from teasing him about dropping things to the pain of watching him learn to handle his hooks. My faith became stronger for me. While Ralph was in the hospital, I learned to deal with life on my own. And I learned that God was indeed my helper and companion. He gave me the strength to face each night's sleep on my own. He spoke to me through the scripture, giving me encouragement through each day, and showing me the reason for Ralph's accident and the good that would come out of it. We were following God's plan for us, and He would take this tragedy and turn it into a miracle. We had built a foundation, and now we were ready to put up the structure. The structure is Rainbow Acres. The accident became the jumping off place for the dream. Ralph did recover, we made it through as a family, and the dream did not go up in smoke. In fact, it thrived. An article was written about Ralph. This man, who in the process of building a ranch for handicapped individuals, had become handicapped himself. It was picked up in newspapers and magazines across the country. We began to see a trickle and then a flood of letters coming in with words of encouragement and donations to the cause. On June 1st, 1974, Rainbow Acres was a reality. And by the end of July, we were having our first open house to show the world what we'd been able to accomplish. In speaking about milestones in our life, Rainbow Acres certainly stands out as perhaps the most definitive. But it certainly was not the end. Ralph and I eventually moved on from Rainbow, leaving the watering to others. As with all endings, that time is filled with bittersweet memories for me. But I knew that this ministry was bigger than us, and the Lord would continue to give the increase long after we had left, and so He has. Thank you.